Okay. How about now? Can you hear me? Let me know if you can hear me. Trying to see. No. Still no sound, it looks like. Okay. So let me see. Oh, okay. Looks like it's come through. Sound is working now. Good. All right. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Yes, yes, okay, yes, okay. All right. Good. All right. So I'm hoping you can see me and hear me now. We're going for both audio and video. Fantastic. Thank you all for your comments. Thanks for giving me the feedback. It helps a lot. When there's so many of us together, it's hard to know. All right, fantastic. So welcome to episode 3 of Is This a Dream? As always, it's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to receive all the questions. I've tried to choose the questions that will reflect many people's doubts so that we can touch as many doubts as possible. Let's remember here that the purpose of the Q&A, somebody says, don't freeze. Yes. Let's see how connection is stable or not. Otherwise, I'll jump back on like I did before. Remember that the purpose of the Q&A is not to add more content to the mind. Okay? It's whatever is in the mind already, whatever questions are there, it's to start pulling those out, to start dissolving them, right? By meeting the question and disengaging it. That's the point, right? It's not to learn more and more information. There's nothing new per se that we have to learn other than matching the intellect and its ideas with the perception of what's going on. There's no new information to learn other than as a translator, translating our experience. Okay, so let's take a pause right now as we're all here together for the same reason, to see ourselves and this world more clearly. Once again, thank you for being here. Let's jump in. So the first question we have here says, so are you saying to forget, to disattach from the ones we love in the first mind? So this touches upon so many things. Are you saying to forget, to disattach from the ones we love in the first mind? First, let's look at this idea of detachment, right? In spirituality, there's a lot of talk about detachment. And what does detachment mean? So detachment is actually a tactic or a device, a way of directing attention. So suppose, for example, right now, you're looking at the screen, right? I'm looking at the screen. Now, suppose there was something happening to the side or behind you, right? That was important. Because the attention is directed this way, then we don't recognize what's happening back there in another direction. So in that case, someone might say, hey, look, detach, meaning detach your attention from that which it is currently on, right? And reattach it in a sense, or shift it to another direction. So in this case, I might shift my direction, I might shift my attention in this direction. And when I do, then we discover a whole different experience, right? What is seen in this direction is different than what is seen here. So similarly, when we say detach from something, detach simply means shift the attention because there is more to be recognized, okay? And having recognized this, if I recognize what's going on here, then it doesn't mean that I have to ignore what's happening here in front of me, right? The whole point in detaching from this attention was to see what's going on here and then resume an even broader field of vision that assimilates both and integrates both. So it's integrating all fields of vision. This is why we talk about detachment. It is not that something actually has to be detached from. However, in the process of recognizing a broader swath of reality, there has to be some shifting of attention, right? It's like the concept of opportunity cost in economics, right? If you want to do this, for example, if you want to listen here, there's something else that you won't be able to do, right? If you want to go to the gym at 9 a.m., then you won't be able to read a book at 9 a.m. It's one or the other. So it's in the same way. We have to direct our attention in some ways, and that often takes the form of the message of detachment. So it is not that there has to be an inherent detachment. It is that the vision has to be broadened. The vision has to be deepened. And then everything fits into that. Okay, so this is one perspective on it. It's not that we have to detach from something and forget about that. No, it's that we have to recognize a broader picture. Now, the other thing is, when we say detach from the ones we love, again, what we are doing is seeing more and more of the ones we love, right? As a result of shifting our attention on ourselves in a different way, we're seeing more and more of ourselves. And as a direct result of that, we are seeing more and more of the ones we love and more of everything, right? Because it is our own awareness that is reflected in what we recognize of the world. Let's take a pause. So it is not that we have to detach from the ones we love, but we see more and more of what they are. Just as we are not simply this collection of thoughts, this collection of feelings, this collection of organs, similarly, the ones we love and everybody, all things, are not just that collection of thoughts, that collection of feelings, that collection of organs. There is more to what they are. So it's detaching from the limited notion of what things are, what people are, and seeing things more deeply and more fully, right? So this detachment has to be understood in context. In the early stages, it can feel as if one is detaching from something and leaving something behind. But in fact, that's en route to developing a much more all-encompassing vision of what this is and what's going on. Okay, detaching from the ones we love in the first mind. So that's the broader perspective. And again here, when we say in the first mind, what is that first mind? That first mind is superimposing that image of what we see as our loved ones, right? It is not that they are not our loved ones, but that is not all that they are. Just as your body and your thoughts are not all of what you are, and just as the floor beneath you, all of it is not simply atoms and molecules, right? There's more to what it is than that. So shifting beyond the first mind perspective of relationship is simply seeing much more of what this relationship is and what the people, who the people are involved in this relationship, right? So it's when we think about it as giving up something, that giving up is because of the first mind perspective seems so concrete and so definitive and so, I won't say complete, but so real in its own right. So it feels like giving up a lot. However, what we're actually giving up is that boundary of the first mind. And in doing so, much more vision streams in. Let's pause. Bring your awareness to the forefront. Second question, is this escaping from life? Is this escaping from life. I'm not sure what this refers to. I'm guessing meditation, introspection, recognizing the three minds, seeing ourselves differently. Is all of this escaping from life? Well, it would be escaping from life if we were simply detaching from the whole first mind perspective and there's nothing else there. If we're simply detaching and that's it. However, that's not it. As we discussed, detaching is from a particular perspective, and in doing so, gaining a more full perspective, right? So it is not escaping from life. It's actually the opposite. It's turning squarely and facing life and meeting life, right? You know that in the seat of meditation, it's not easy to sit, right? It's not easy to sit and be there in the beginning, right? Because all the thoughts that have not been addressed, all the doubts, all the beliefs, all the emotions, all the trauma, everything that has not been faced, that in fact we have been escaping from, is there and will start to come up, right? For everyone, all of these things have to come up eventually, and all of them have to be released. So this, meaning the process of introspection and recognizing, is not escaping from life. That notion of escaping comes because we set time aside to introspect, right? If you're sitting and meditating, it can seem like I'm running away from the world. But it's no different than studying for an exam. If I were going to study for an exam, I would have to set time aside and use that time to study, right? And then take the exam. When I'm studying for the exam, I'm not escaping from the exam, right? I'm simply preparing. I'm developing the skills. I'm developing the tools that then I will apply, right? So similarly, this meditation, this introspection is not escaping. It is actually dedicating time to say, you know what? I'm going to face my life squarely. I'm no longer going to run from that which has been driving me on cruise control for so many decades. I'm standing my ground. I'm letting what comes come. And I'm willingly entering the process of transformation. Let's take a pause. Okay. At what stage does cosmic intelligence take over our mind or life? And does life go on autopilot for the better? Right? So at what stage does the deeper intelligence take over and everything is on autopilot? Right? So what this is really talking about is being established as the second mind configuration. Right? Because in the first mind, there's a constant, I have to do it, I have to do it. That first mind, I, feels like it has to do everything. And that's why it gets overwhelmed and it can break down. Right? So what stage does it take over? It is when this second mind configuration is established. Now, I'm careful about the word autopilot mode, right? It almost sounds like there's no volition or there's nothing to do, right? Certainly at certain times it can be like that. However, there's still a direction, a directionality to the life, right? There's still a course. But my feeling is this question refers to the sense of ease, the sense of flow, the sense of struggle being over. And that is really when this second mind configuration is established, from that first mind sense of constriction to the transitional state, back and forth, until steadily that mind is established in a new configuration. How does prolonged anxiety, hello Jean-Anne from Jamaica. How long does prolonged anxiety as a result of emotional trauma sorry, not how long, how does prolonged anxiety as a result of emotional trauma fit into the framework? See, anxiety and trauma, these are what form the boundary of the first mind, that sense of identity. These are what reinforce the boundary, right? The fundamental boundary is the sense of localization, the sense of being this distinct thing and not that, right? This concretized, distinct separateness is the boundary of identity of the first mind. Anxiety and emotional trauma reinforce that, right? Because it's anxiety about what? It's anxiety about what might happen to me. What is that me? That me is that sense of boundary, that sense of localization, that sense of identity. So that anxiety reinforces the sense of boundary, of identity. Emotional trauma, same thing. How does emotional trauma fit into the framework? All trauma creates boundaries. All trauma creates boundaries. In fact, the most essential trauma, the trauma that all human beings share in that sense, is the sense of being different and separate from our fundamental nature. Right? So if you're listening to this and you feel and you have trauma, you've experienced trauma, as all of us have, right? It's not about whether it seems like major trauma to someone else or minor trauma. All of that is irrelevant. When we have experienced some kind of trauma, big or small, whatever it might be, emotional, mental, physical, any kind of trauma, right? That adds to that sense of identity and that boundary. However, nobody is alone in that. Everyone has experienced that in different ways, to different extents, certainly. And furthermore, everyone has experienced that essential trauma, which is at some point the stories that we've been told and the beliefs that we've been given from the adults around us when we were children and that have continued now, that creates a lack of vision of what we are. It walls off our vision and it walls off our access to the wonderful expanse of life that is always here. And that trauma is common to everyone. And that trauma is resolvable. And that's the whole reason we're here and we're talking about this. Let's take a pause. Awareness in the foreground. All right, so Namaste, Christina. So someone says, the Three Minds Framework does present a simplified understanding. Now in meditation, however, there are thoughts like, is this the first mind? Is this the second mind? So it seems that the framework was helpful in some sense, and it has caused a problem in some sense, in that now there are questions during meditation. So let's see how this framework is used, how it's useful. In this context, it's really to recognize where the mind is in its process, right? This is different from the seat of meditation. In the seat of meditation, it's the time for meditation, right? It's not the time for thinking about things. Thinking about things is the time for reflection. So we can set aside time, okay, I'm going to reflect on these things, and now is the practice of meditation, right? So, for example, again, going back to the exam analogy, when I'm studying for the exam, I might think about different tactics, right? Well, I need to study this much. Let me study for an hour, and then I'll give the mind a 10-minute break because it tends to get weary after an hour, and I'll give the mind a 10-minute break. And then after that, we will start studying again, right? So we might do that in preparation for the exam, this kind of analysis. Now, when it's time to do the exam, during the exam, we're not thinking about our study tactics, right? We don't think about, well, maybe I should have done 10 minutes here, but really I should have done an hour first, or, these kinds of things don't occur during the exam. During the exam, it's performance time. We're performing, right? Similarly, in meditation, all thoughts are the same, right? It's not about the thoughts. Even if it's thoughts about the three minds, the thoughts about the three minds in meditation is not as helpful. Because in meditation, there's a thought coming. Let it be good, let it be bad, let it be anything. Fundamentally, it's a thought. So let it come, let it go, right? It's not that, well, this is about the three minds and now I have to think about it. No. Let it come and let it go, right? And then later, we can reflect on what is happening with that mind using the framework. Now, if during meditation you want to do some reflection, that's fine. There's no problem with that. I'm simply saying that in meditation, a thought is a thought. There's no good thought, bad thought, helpful thought, unhelpful thought, because we're looking at the very mechanism of the mind in meditation, not the details of its content, but the very fact that content arises and subsides. Okay? Is being the breath in the first mind or not? Is being the breath in the first mind or not? Now, this really depends on what this experience is of being the breath. Won't be able to say first mind, second mind just based on this. All right, the question is, look at the sense of identity. If there is a distinct sense of identity that within this is what I am, and there's something that is not me beyond this, that feeling is the first mind. Okay, that feeling, it might feel like constriction, it might feel like restriction. For many people, it just feels like what it feels like to be alive, because that is simply the experience. And for some people, it would be stunning to hear that if there is a feeling of being a distinct individual, that itself is a configuration of the mind. Because there's a fundamental assumption in society that what we are is this discrete thing, period, independent of mind and anything else. And anything else would be a delusion or would be confusion. But we're turning that on its head by taking the position that consciousness is fundamental. Now identity has an entire range of music that it sings to, right? What we are fundamentally changes based on the configuration of the mind. So whether the breath is the first mind or not depends on the sense of identity, right? If the entire world is my breath, if the wind is my breath, that is likely a second mind configuration, that experience, right? So establishing as the second mind, where that wavering stops and the vision is distinct and the vision is clear. Awareness to the foreground. The feeling, I am. No further explanation is necessary. I am this, I am that, I am she, I am he, I am they, I am this. All of these are there. Fundamentally, I am. And that I is not different for this body or that body, or this personality or that personality. Okay. Next question. What is the relationship between consciousness and altered states and trance states? Okay, so relationship between consciousness and altered states and trance states. So, very simply, altered states and trance states are states of mind. Consciousness itself is not a state. It is consciousness which self-modifies as various states. Consciousness is not restricted to a particular state. It's not dependent on a particular state. Consciousness in and as itself is the third mind, pure potential. Right? So one of the common states that we talk about is this waking state. Right? We say that we're awake now, right? Because we woke up from sleep. Well, what is it that's awake? In sleep, does the body sleep? No, the body is actually quite active during sleep. Right? The limbs may not be moving so much, but the heart is pumping, the lungs are moving, right? The blood is streaming. There's homeostatic mechanisms are at play. Everything is being regulated beautifully. Memory is being consolidated. The immune system is functioning. The body is quite active during what we call sleep. So in sleep, what is sleeping is the personal mind. Right? And there's an entire chapter on this, on the states, waking, dreaming, sleeping in the book. Is this a dream? So what is sleeping is the mind. Right? When we say we wake up, what does it mean? The personal mind has woken up. Right? When we say I'm dreaming, what does it mean? That mind is dreaming. So these are states of mind, right? We can call them altered states. They're alternate states. When we talk about altered states, it usually sounds like something mystical or something unusual. Take that definition out. Just leave that definition. And just know that all states are altered states. They're basically alternate states. One state is an alternate to another state, right? Like just like you have on a team, you have substitute players. One player is playing, gets fatigued, then they have to be brought out, and you put the substitute in. The alternate player goes in, right? They're players. We just alternate them. Similarly, these are states of mind. We exchange them. Consciousness says, sure, boom, here's one projection, here's one state. Sure, boom, here's another projection. Sure, another projection. Those are states. Trance is a particular state of the mind, right? When the mind is held in a particular way, that's trance, it's a state. When a person does psychedelics, a certain kind of state. Potential expressing in a particular way is what we call these states. Right? This, what we are in now, this waking mind, right? For the majority, this is an altered state. Let's not think that this is a natural state. No, the first mind itself is an altered state of mind. Right? It is only the third mind that is unaltered. It is pure potential in and of itself. Altered in a particular way in the state of flux is what appears as the second mind of consciousness, as though fluxing as the world. Further altered is what experienced as the first mind with a distinct boundary. You see? So altered states and trance states, this is an altered state. If it's the first mind state, it is an altered state. Now, we might talk about states of consciousness as well, right? Let's not be too wedded to the words. Let's not be too stuck on the words. Recognize the underlying meaning, right? So somebody might say states of consciousness. That's okay. As long as we understand that the word consciousness is used in so many ways, the word mind is used in so many ways, but fundamentally for the purpose of recognizing and for it to be crystal clear, consciousness as itself is undifferentiated. It is the potential which expresses as the world of mind, the flux of mind, the oscillations of mind, the vibrations of mind, right? The information that is mind. All right? So this is the relationship between consciousness, fundamental awareness, and that which it is conscious of, which are experienced in different states of the mind, whether they're trance, or alternate or altered, they're different states. Okay. Then, there were many questions about Kundalini that came up. So I'll try to just do a couple of these just to group them together. Let's take a pause here. The first question, does Kundalini life force originate in the third mind? Yes. Yes, by definition. Everything that we are seeing, experiencing, originates from the third mind, from this state of pure potential, right? From this pure potential, all the states, all the experiences are emerging, including Kundalini. Is true human happiness or contentment a result of being connected to the second mind? Also, yes. Right? Genuine contentment comes from the second mind. In fact, all contentment that a person experiences comes from that state of potential and then is experienced through that first mind. The source of that experience is not recognized. That's all. Right? So let's say I want a toy and I've wanted that toy so bad and there's a strong desire for it. Now, when that desire goes away, that resulting opening, right, is what is that feeling? That feeling is that boundary around the first mind thinning for just that moment. Right? I want something, I want something, I want something, I want something, I want something. This steady desire builds and builds and builds. Then, when that thing is had, that feeling of boundary, that feeling of being separate and needing something, for that moment, it goes away. That boundary thins out a little bit. And that the experience of that is what we say, feels good. That feeling of contentment is the experience of the boundary thinning. So in that case, is happiness or contentment a result of being the second mind? Yes, because that second mind itself is the thinning and dissolving of the first mind boundary. Right? The second mind, in an established configuration, established as the second mind, it is the unreasonable contentment. In the first mind, there's contentment with good reason. Right? I got something. That's the reason there's contentment. I achieved something. That's the reason there's contentment. The second mind is unreasonable contentment. There's no reason. Right? It is simply the absence of a concrete boundary itself is the experience of satisfaction. So yes, true human happiness, contentment is a result of being connected to the second mind. Not so much being connected to the second mind, being the second mind. Being established in that second mind configuration. Because remember, we're talking about the identity. It's not that there's an identity that has the second mind. Right? That's a first mind configuration where the identity has something. In the second mind, the identity itself is of the nature of consciousness and is expressing as the world and the individual. So it's not that we have the second mind, it is that the second mind is our nature. Okay. More on, there were a lot of questions on Kundalini and mind. Let's just say this, which is that fundamentally, one of the things we're talking about is what is real, right? This is implied in the name of the book. Is this a dream, right? What is real? What does the word real mean? What do we mean by reality? So much of this is shaped by our stories and our perceptions. And Kundalini in itself is something that can change the perceptions. So what is real goes into play, right? It's not something that's fixed in that sense. Now, there is still what we might call the ultimate reality, this third mind, this pure potential, which is beyond change, right? Kundalini is still in the realm of change. We're talking about things that change. Beyond this is still the third mind. However, in the world of time and space, in the world of perception, in the so-called real world of people interfacing with each other, having our responsibilities, living our lifetimes, here perception can change depending on that fundamental life energy. So what is a broad approach to this, to all of this? Speaking about the Kundalini energy, it's simply that the sensitivity increases tremendously, right? The sensitivity of everything, the sensitivity to everything increases. It's almost like if you have a microphone and you turn up the sensitivity, right? So that you get near to any sound and you hear a loud sound, right? Because the instrument becomes so sensitive. Similarly, the human instrument becomes highly sensitive. So a way to manage this is that everything that we are involved in will start to have to make choices as to what works for us and what doesn't. And this is why generally in the field of seeing ourselves more deeply, on the process, on the journey of seeing ourselves, we're going to have to make choices, right? We can't always live exactly the way we've always lived and have changes happen. And the reason is because this, as the life force comes online, so to speak, right? It's online already to some extent, but as the percentage, more and more of it comes online, we have to make choices. That means food. What are we eating? That's going to affect the process. Who are we hanging out with? That's going to affect the process, right? What are we watching? What are we reading? What's our schedule like in the morning, right? What happens in the afternoon, the evening? All of these things start to become much more sensitive. And a person starts to choose or has to choose ways in which all of these align with their experiences, with what they're going through. All right, this is a general way to manage this process, this activation that can happen, right? Making choices with food, with people, with all of these things. And as these things align with what we are and what we are experiencing, things start to become easier and the sensitivity is easier to manage. Okay, so it's not about let's leave all of the other things and focus on what it is that can be managed. What are the basics that can be managed? Okay. And finally, practical, a stepwise approach to this, to the first mind, second mind, third mind. See, in the study of Vedanta, there's a saying, or there's a stepwise process that's called Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam. So Shravanam is listening, right? It's basically hearing a better story is one way to say it. All the stories that we're generally given are incomplete. Even the good ones are incomplete. So hearing a better story, hearing a story that actually ties it all together, that touches the needs, the need to understand certain things, right? That weaves all of it together. This is Shravanam, listening. This is the first step. Listening doesn't mean accepting. It doesn't mean that whatever I hear, yes, I take it to be true. It also doesn't mean rejecting. Whatever I hear, no, it's not true. It means listening and being able to consider it. And that's the next step. The next step after Shravanam is Mananam. Mananam comes from the word manas. And manas is the root for mind, right? So what is Mananam? It is reflecting, using the mind to reflect on these notions that were heard. So having heard descriptions of what is real, we don't know if it's real. So having heard descriptions of what may be real, then considering them, reflecting on them. Well, in my life, this has been the experience, right? In their life, this has been the experience. I see this with my parents. I see this with my siblings. I see this with my friends. I've experienced this. So reflecting like this, right? Is it true? Does it make sense? That's mananam. And the third step is nididhyasanam, which is introspection. Directly investigating in one's own experience, meditation, whatever the form of introspection might be, or meditation might be. This is nididhyasanam. So shravanam, mananam, nididhyasanam. Listening, hearing, reflecting, considering, and then meditating on it. All right, and there are two more factors to mention. One is living it. Not just listening in private, reflecting in private, meditating in private, but then having the courage to live that dawning, live that recognition in the world. Because generally, the people that are around will not be expecting transformation, will not be expecting something different, right? And it might be a challenge to them, in fact, if this kind of process is happening, because as you see yourself more clearly, everything else comes into focus too. All the things that people hide, right? It's just a general thing. Private secrets, these kinds of behaviors, all of these kinds of things start to come into view. And so it can be challenging to live our recognition in the world, right? So that's also an important step. Gradually come to live this truth. Which truth? The truth that you yourself have mined. M-I-N-E-D, mind, like they mine gold, right? The truth that you yourself have mined, to live that. So hearing, reflecting and considering, and meditating, assimilating it in one's own experience, and then living that in the world. Okay, what supports all of these? The lifestyle factors, all the lifestyle factors that we mentioned earlier. Let's take a pause. And then we have about 15 minutes left. Let's take a look at a couple more things from the book. Last time, in the introduction, this is the book. I know many of you have purchased it. Is This a Dream? Reflections on the Awakening Mind. It's available on the website, anoopkumar.com. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's a link for the book. Okay. Also, if you have further questions, there are consultations available too, one-to-one consultations on the website. So let's look at page 7. I read this last time, but I'd like to go into it a little bit more depth now. I said that we are now upon a time, this is an introduction, we are now upon a time in which our perspectives on spirituality, science, philosophy, and religion have evolved enough to stand together in the glare of the spotlight as we ask the most practical of questions. What are those questions that we should ask of all fields of knowledge, of all people, of anyone? What are those questions for spirituality, for science, for philosophy, for religion, for theology, for anything, for literature, for history? Here are the questions. What is the common truth among all these? Right? So it's great if science says one thing, it's great if spirituality says another, and religion says, but let's get all of them together and say, what is the common truth among all of you that are saying all these things? What's the common truth? How does it change my life right now? Right? It's nice, okay, there's a common truth. Does it affect my life? And how does it change the world? Right? How does it change my life? How does it change the world? And what is the common truth? In the intersection of these three, in the union of all of these questions, is something that is truly a gem. Right? Because In the union of these questions, all contradictions have to dissolve. All contradictions have to disappear. Because philosophy can say one thing, another philosophy can say another. Science can say one thing, contradict something philosophy says. Religion can contradict both. Spirituality might say, no, this is the way. But now line them all up and say, no, I'm going to hold you to this. What is the common truth among all of these statements? And not just that, does it affect me? Does it affect the world? If we can satisfy all of these criteria, common truth affects me, affects the world, we have a true gem, right? A true transformative gem. What is philosophy? How is it different from religion? How is it different from science? These are categories of human experience, right? Philosophy is based in thought experiments. What is thought based in? It's mainly based in our perceptions of the world, right? What is perception based in? It's based on our identity. When the identity changes, perception changes. So that philosophy is ultimately a reflection of the identity. What does religion say? Religion might say, this God is real, that God is not real. No, that God is not real, this God is real. Right? What is that based on? It's based on somebody's experience, which is based on identity. What does science say? We have to conduct this experiment. We have to minimize bias. Why do we have to minimize bias? Because a scientist recognizes that by virtue of my upbringing, there is a bias that I have. The only thing is, often in today's science, the extent of the bias is not recognized, that the very mental configuration itself is a bias on the nature of the world. And what is that based on? The sense of identity. So you see, whether we're talking about religion or philosophy or science or spirituality or any field, what we're fundamentally talking about is identity. As the identity goes, so goes the nature of the human being and the nature of the world. So that is why we must look for the common truth in these. And that way there are no more contradictions. I don't have to say, I reject this, religion's not for me, science is not for me, spirituality is not for me. It can all be for me, right? We can learn from all of them. Why not? They're different perspectives, different lenses on how the human being understands and recognizes the world. Let us not be restricted to them, but we can use them to enrich our perspectives in different ways. And that's really the intention of this book, is this a dream? Okay. So that all was the introduction. And then now we're on part one. You're not who you think you are. And in fact, the first sentence, chapter 1 is called Missing Person. We're on page 11. Missing Person is the title of chapter 1. And the first sentence is, you're not who you think you are, the detective said. The detective said, you're not who you think you are. So let's pause here and just reflect. The detective said, you're not who you think you are. We've talked about this. Who we think we are, this idea of who we think we are, is reinforced by the public conversation. Right? It's actually a very important modifier, the public conversation, because what I've discovered in talking to scientists and philosophers is that many people publicly will say one thing, but privately have many reservations about that very same thing. So for example, there are many people who would say that the brain is fundamental and brain produces consciousness, and there's no such thing as consciousness beyond the brain. Right? Publicly, that's the stance, but privately, there are many reservations about that. Right? Because privately, I think it's something like 50% of the population has had experiences that they can't explain. Now, what does it mean to say experiences that we cannot explain? It means that can't be explained within the context of the public conversation. It's not that the experiences cannot actually be explained. They've been explained for millennia. But they can't be explained in the context of the public conversation, of the public idea of what it is to be intelligent, right? Generally, right? Can't say across the board. Generally, the public idea regarding brain is that the brain is fundamental, body is fundamental, and consciousness is a byproduct or an epiphenomenon of this brain. That's the public conversation, right? That's the public stance, generally speaking. And so to have an experience that is contrary to that leaves us with no public story to tell about it, right? Privately, we may wonder with our friends. Privately, we may have theories, but publicly, that story isn't out there, which is one reason why I wrote this book, is to make the story more public, that consciousness is fundamental and not restricted by any means to either a body or a lifetime, right? So the first sentence, "You're not who you think you are," indicates in just that one sentence that publicly the story of what we are as a body, right? Publicly, even the idea of emotions and thoughts being what we are, that itself is not common. Publicly, the story of what we are is that there is a body. So when we say you're not who you think you are, it means that this public story is at best radically incomplete. That which we refer to ourselves as in the space of public conversation, that is not what we are. Not that it's absolutely not what we are, but it is relatively a smaller aspect of what we are. Like when we talked about shifting attention, right? When we say not this, this, we're not saying that it's actually not this. We're simply saying, look, shift the attention away to this, then broaden the attention to include this also. So it's not that the body is not part of us or the mind is not part of us. It's just that relatively speaking, this first mind living is a small fraction of what we are. And then we'll go further down the page. I'll read a couple lines here in these last few minutes. This chapter is about a character named Maggie who is experiencing her personality coming and going, or who's trying to find herself, so to speak. And she's having varying experiences. And so later on I say, she had tried everything else already, talking to her closest friends, reading a ton of self-help books, confiding in her guidance counselor, and at the urging of her parents, seeing a psychiatrist. But 3 years later, and 4 prescription medications later, nada. Nobody seemed to understand what she was trying to say. Let's pause here. So we're describing Maggie's experience. Talking to her friends, reading a ton of self-help books, confiding in her guidance counselor, seeing a psychiatrist, but nobody's understanding what she's trying to say. Why? Because what she's getting at is her own sense of identity. And unless someone else has been through that process of examining identity and recognizing its boundaries and how it refracts our experience of the world, then they're not going to understand, right? They may have heard it before, they may have heard something similar, and they might categorize it in a particular way or label it in a particular way, but they won't be able to understand, because what is at stake is the sense of what they are itself, right? So reading, talking to a friend, if the friend may understand, may empathize, but if they haven't been in that process, that'll be difficult to understand, right? Reading a ton of self-help books. The process of recognizing oneself is not really about bettering oneself, right? This isn't about being better. This is about recognizing I am fine, just fine, quite all right already, right? Not that the personality is perfect, not that the personality doesn't have quirks, all those things are there, but what I am is not only this. What I am is vastly more than only this. And in this big scheme of things, in this second mind perspective, there's nothing to be better about. There's nothing that I have to be better about, right? As a fundamental character, as a fundamental being, there's nothing to be better. Activities in the world can be done better. Perspectives can be seen better. Yes, that's different because that is in a cultural context. But fundamentally, what we are cannot be better, right? So it's not about helping ourselves to be better. All of the things, the joy, the happiness, insight, being able to do things, all of these things come as side effects. This quote unquote betterment are side effects. We're not doing it to be better. We're simply doing it to see ourselves as we are. And that's more than good enough. That is the ultimate satisfaction in not having to be fundamentally better, but being quite all right as we are. So we'll go on next week. We're in chapter 1 now. We made it through the intro. We'll go on to the rest of Missing Person. And then chapter 2, thank you for all your comments. I'll take a look at the comments and questions after this and throughout the week. And as usual, compile some questions for next time. Feel free, check out the website, anoopkumar.com. If you subscribe on the website, there is an ebook called A Brief Orientation to Life. It's kind of like a summary of a lot of the main questions or main perspectives, right? Like if you had come into life and somebody said, here's the orientation, what would that be? That's what I tried to pack into that ebook. That's available for free download on subscription at anoopkumar.com. Let's take a moment here. Bring your awareness to the foreground. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next week, same time.